Hey everyone, welcome back to another installment of the Crypto My Money Show. My name is Martin and this is Joel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully you watched part one of our series, What is Money? This is the second piece of that, where we're going to continue exploring money, its origins, its functions, characteristics, and exploring the question, what is money?
And what is, yeah, that's a question that even I am still asking myself every day.
Yeah, I've been asking myself this question for a long time. And the more that I read and the more that I think I understand money, the less I feel I understand it. So even with all the research that I've done, including the research for this series, I feel like I still don't have a full grasp on what is money. Do
And
you
I'm
feel
in the
that
same
way?
boat. I'm in the
Yeah.
same boat. And I feel like it depends too on who you ask or where you go for, to look for information. It almost seems like everyone has their own definition, which,
Yeah.
would yeah, which tends to confuse me as well. But if you were to say or explain what is money in one sentence or one word, what would you say it is?
Money is a story.
Interesting. I would say money is whatever you make it to be, and whatever people believe and trust to be. It's almost the way that I say it's almost like whatever you persuade people to believe as being money.
Right. Before print media and communication, people used stories to pass down wisdom, lessons, and to remember heroes and to also share stories. And I think money is kind of similar, where people had created a story in their mind, and that story was associated to a physical, tangible thing that then was used to facilitate trade.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're taking it way back to the origins of almost humans, or society,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Nowadays, we think of money as something that is controlled by governments, but there's nothing centralized about money. It wasn't started by any one person or government, and governments didn't really intervene in money until more recent history. So money, the idea of money spawned out of the necessity to trade because it was very difficult to produce everything for yourself. So naturally, people needed a way to exchange their time and energy so that they could cover all their essential needs.
And that's pretty crazy also to think. Like you mentioned that money is relatively new, but to try to put it into perspective, Homo sapiens, or what we know today as humans, have been around for about 300,000 years. The first recorded instance of paper money being used is around 1600 AD, which is, I mean, that's like what in the timeline. If we were to make like the timeline into one day, that would be like the equivalent of maybe a couple seconds.
A couple seconds in the grand story of humanity, right? Of us
Right.
existing as we are. Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's for paper money, right? You said for so essentially money
Yeah.
that
Money as
as we kind of understand it right now.
exactly, and money as what? Because when I was growing up, when I asked anyone what is money, they would just show me a dollar bill. So growing up and up until
Yeah,
very
me
recently,
too.
like that's money. I always thought of like the paper dollar bill. That's
Right.
what I associate as money.
Yeah, that it was the same way for myself, and unfortunately, our education system does us a disservice because we don't learn about finance. So we take money to be the dollar bill, when in fact, um, paper money is some of the worst money that you can use, especially nowadays with inflation and money printing left and right.
I guess it's interesting that I'm taking more of a, or I see my definition of what is money as being something that whatever you make to believe, but more and more recent than you, you're really taking it to the core, to the source of when humans started to trade and what they used then for money.
Right. I mean, it's only natural that we need a way to keep track of and exchange our labor and our time so that we can cover all the needs that we have.
Yeah, exactly. Makes life a lot easier, right? What is one some of the most interesting things that you found out to be used as money from way back in the day?
Well, precious metals are natural, um, like natural first place that I explored, but there's nothing crazy about that. It is a little wild to think, though, that coins, even a few thousand years ago, were made out of actual gold and silver. So pretty quickly, humans gravitated towards precious metals. It's really easy to weigh them out, create exact sizes, and with same quantities of the precious metal. So when you exchanged the coins, it was really easy to keep track of the value that was being exchanged. But also, I found out that I don't know if this was like thousands of years ago or 1,000 or a few hundred years ago, that some farmers and merchants would use gold for like big transactions, and then silver would be used for smaller transactions. But then they would also use salt, almost like we use coins now. So if they had a little bit left over, essentially the change, right, that they needed to pay on a debt or whatever, then they would use salt.
Wow, that is pretty crazy. I first time I hear
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I found that to be pretty interesting. But also, people use, even to this day, equipment as money, right? I need this and you have this. Let's do a trade. Um, Land as well could be used as money, and I think it's pretty natural for us to think of money or of land as an asset that you can buy and then you can pass it down to your kids and they can pass it down to their grandkids. But yeah, even nowadays in Mexico, I know that cars and land are often used in transactions, so um, they're a form of money as well.
Yeah, it almost seems like anything that could be considered to be an asset could be used as money in theory, right? Because it could be exchanged because it has value. Now, the problem would be trying to find someone that is looking for that exact same asset if it's a very unique asset. I mean,
Right.
something like land or a car would probably be a little bit easier.
Yeah, the assets have the function that they can perform of medium of exchange. Now, they don't act very well as stores of value because they're unique, right? Each property is unique, each car is unique, each motorcycle is unique. So when you're using those assets as money, it's a little more challenging because the value isn't set.
So it would be whatever value the person's doing the transaction
It's
set
it's
for it,
ar-
right?
it's
And I
ar-
guess
yeah, it's
it
arbitrary.
arbitrary, and then it
Yeah,
goes back into trying to barter and trying to get at a set price that both parties are
yeah,
relatively happy with.
yep.
What about cheese?
Cheese is delicious, but if you are going to eat a really good cheese, it needs to age for a while, which is problematic. So, in my research, I found that in an area of Italy that produces a lot of cheese, there's a bank called Credito Emiliano that has a warehouse and they accept cheese as collateral on loans to small farmers. So, in a sense, that cheese is acting like an asset or money because the farmer needs money to operate their farm and have working capital. But if their cheese needs to age 2 years, the money that they spent this year to produce that cheese is going to take at least 2 years to become realized. However, it's risky for the bank to loan to these small farmers because a lot of them go under. So they take the cheese that was produced as collateral, and then the farmer gets the loan that they need, and then the cheese matures 18 months, 24 months, or whatever, and the loan's paid back. The farmer gets their cheese, and then they sell the cheese. And if the farmer isn't able to pay the loan or they go under, then the bank still has this asset. They let the cheese mature, they sell it, and they cover the loss that they took on the loan.
Wow, would have never thought.
Yeah,
Cheese of all things.
yeah, it's really interesting, but it makes sense. Uh, Italian cheese is prized, it's expensive, and it's a whole process to allow it to age. And it's, I guess in hindsight, right? Hindsight's 2020. In hindsight, it does seem like a pretty smart move on the part of that bank.
Mhm. Definitely. Hey, and if they can't if they can't get rid of the cheese, they can always eat it, right?
Exactly. Now, cheese is sort of an exception when it comes to food. Last time we talked about how things like food or dairy, milk don't really make good money because they're not durable. But in this case, the cheese gets better as it ages. So it's an exception to that general guideline that food does not make good money.
Mhm. And yeah, I mean, in a way, it goes back to whatever person wants to believe it to be money, right? If they all want to believe cheese is money because they make, in their head they justify it, kind of like how you explained that maybe they justified it, then why not?
Yeah. And speaking of things that are around, there's an island in the Pacific called Yap. The people of the island are known as Yappies. And way back in the days, they used these gigantic, round, kind of like donut shaped stones as money. Did you know about that?
Interesting. No, first time again.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is with Pacific Islanders and stones. Kind of, it reminded me of Easter Island and the big old carvings.
Yeah, maybe they were using them as currency, as money as well. Who knows, right? But hey, why
Maybe.
not?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the thing is that the stone used that was then carved into the money did not exist on that island. The stone on the island wasn't suitable. It was shale. So one of the members of the tribe found stone that could be used that was solid and would be durable, but it was on an island called Palau, 700 miles away.
So it was scarce, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Scarcity. So imagine Pacific Islanders, and this was like 700 years ago, transporting stone across the open sea 700 miles.
Wow, that is pretty hard to imagine.
And some of
Um,
these stones were up to 8 feet in diameter. They weren't
well,
small.
they're huge.
Yeah, that was they were taller than them.
Wow, that is pretty crazy. And I guess this also brings up uh, something that we've touched based on before as well. That it's almost like human tendency to want to create money, right? To make it easier to trade one thing for
Yeah.
another. Because this Icelanders, like no one probably told them, hey, like this is a process to create money or currency. Like they came up with it by themselves, and it's like almost the same, the same principles followed by other cultures, other societies.
Yeah, yeah. We've seen cultures in different periods spread across all over the world that naturally gravitate towards using something, preferably something that's durable, as money. So what's interesting with these stones is that the value was derived similar to like what we were saying with the land, but it was based in part due to the size. The size affected the value, the quality of the cut, the craftsmanship that went into the carving, how difficult it was to transport, right? So like mentally they were taking into account how hard was it to produce
Mhm.
this final product, and then even how many people died while the stone was being transported.
That's true. I guess
And
it was pretty hard to it was pretty hard for someone to start printing it
yeah,
in mass, right?
yeah, exactly. And if the sailor who led the party to fetch that stone and brought it back had some sort of fame, then that stone that he brought would naturally have a higher value as well. That kind of reminds me of the NFT craze that we've seen in decentralized world as of late. If you're a famous artist and you start dropping NFTs, then all of a sudden those NFTs have higher value.
That's true. That's true.
So 700 years ago, people were doing the same thing. It wasn't digital, but the mindset was the same.
History's bound to repeat itself.
Yep. Now, the end of that currency, the end of the they're called rye stones. The end of the rye stones came around in the 1800s when a Irish American sailor reached the island. I don't know that he was the first um, European to be on the island, but he pretty quickly realized that these stones were used as money, and he had the smart idea of importing modern equipment. And because he had a ship, he was able to transport these stones very easily. So the transportation became a lot easier, and the cutting became a lot easier and more precise as well because he had machinery that was state of the art for the time. And that was a downfall. Less than a century later, the rye stones were relegated to the realm of ceremonial value only because this sailor it started this era of basically mass importation, kind of equivalent to the printing of money that we're seeing right now by central banks. And because it was so easy to produce these stones, they no longer had that value. That story was broken for the people of that island.
Mhm. Interesting. So he, in a sense, was like you mentioned, the government getting a little bit too greedy and wanting to print as much as possible.
Yeah. And now that island is part of Micronesia, and their their legal tender is the US dollar. So they went from the rye stones to I don't know what else in between, and now they're using the dollar
The US dollar, they
as
went from
money.
rocks to paper.
From rocks to paper. Rock, paper, scissors.
How about bringing it back home to the US? What were some pretty popular uh, items used for money back in the day here in the United States?
Yeah, the founding of the United States is an interesting case in money. And sadly, it's one that most people don't know because it's not taught in schools. We learn about the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the founding fathers, early American history, but we don't learn about money. So the colonies, when they were formed, they were using the currency from England. I can't remember what it was at that time, but this money was hard to come about because it had to be physically transported from England. to the New World. So that scarcity naturally moved people to use whatever was available locally for trade. So, did you know that from 1643 to 1660, shells were legal tender in the colony of Massachusetts?
I did not. First time I hear of this, and I think I took a couple history classes back in the day. This never came up.
Never came up. Same in my case. So, Native American tribes of the area really prized wampum shells. And because of this, the people that had arrived from Europe to colonize naturally wanted to or needed to trade with Native Americans. So they started using what was already being used as money in the New World.
Interesting. And what was being used as the money was shells, huh?
Yeah. Now, further south in the colony of Virginia, at around the same time, Virginia declared that tobacco was legal tender.
Mm. I, not surprised, but I also see a lot of problems with that. What if it goes back to don't get high off of your own supply there.
Literally. So people would trade leaves, but that's problematic for many reasons. It's not a good unit to count. The leaves are different sizes, different weights. You need a lot of leaves for to have a material amount, but also durability is pretty bad. So what people did was they would like take their tobacco to the warehouses and they would get a receipt on how much tobacco, like on a certain quantity of tobacco. And that receipt was a promissory note, basically stating that this paper or whatever material they use for the note represented X number of X amount of tobacco or X value of tobacco. So people no longer needed the physical tobacco to do the trade. And as long as there was that quantity of tobacco in a warehouse somewhere.
Ah, interesting. So it's almost like IOU notes saying that, hey, you're putting your tobacco in this warehouse. Here's this receipt or an IOU that is essentially saying I owe you this much tobacco once you come back and show me
Yeah.
this receipt.
But if you needed to do like day-to-day trades, so say you're trying to get food for the evening, well, you take your tobacco to the warehouse, you get this note, and now you can use that note to trade with others because if you give that note to somebody else, they can go to the warehouse and claim that tobacco. So you no longer need the physical tobacco.
Interesting. So there also had to be a lot of trust, right? That if you took that receipt, that they were actually going to give you however much you put in, and also that they were not going to start selling it themselves or using it or whatever. And
Yeah.
then also trust that whoever you exchange that receipt or that note uh, didn't didn't make up that note, right? That it was legit.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Now, interesting enough, this is essentially the same principle under which central banks operate. And it was actually around that same time that the first central bank was founded. So instead of tobacco, though, central banks were originally founded where you would deposit your gold and silver, and you would then receive a promissory note, which is a banknote, same banknote that we know of now, um, minus some differences, which we'll get to, but that like you would deposit your gold or your silver in a bank, like the central bank, and then you would receive that promissory note that was exchangeable for gold or silver. And now that piece of paper represented gold stored in a vault safely at the central bank, and you could use that paper to trade because people would accept it knowing that if they wanted to convert that to gold or silver, they could go to the central bank. So you no longer needed to carry the gold or silver. And that was that's where banknotes started. The paper money that we know of now came to be through that manner.
Mhm.
Now, more recently, the central banks got rid of the gold and the link between gold and paper was broken. So nowadays, the money that we carry around, the dollar bills that we know and use every day, they don't represent gold in the central bank. They represent debt, right? It's different in every country, but it represents here in the United States. If you have a dollar bill, that is $1 on an asset in the central bank, and that asset is very likely a treasury bill. A treasury bill is essentially a loan to the U.S. government. So our the money that we use that we carry around is backed by a loan in the central bank that the central bank uh, made to the government to fund the federal government.
Sounds complicated, and
It is
I gotta
complicated.
say, almost sounds like a pretty vicious cycle in that it's it's essentially debt that keeps on growing. Like you mentioned, money is not backed by anything. You go to the government, to a bank, and you tell them I want to redeem this. They're gonna look at you all crazy and you know and,
Yeah.
and question your sanity. Versus before, right? Like you mentioned, they could go to a bank or to the U.S. government and say, "Hey, this dollar right here says that it's worth X amount of gold. Like, give me my gold."
Yep.
And now you can't do that.
Yep. So gold and silver at the central bank backing this promissory note or bank note has been replaced with debt, primarily loans to the government. So technically, what that dollar bill represents is future cash flow because the federal government taxes us, the people, to service that debt. So the central bank is yielding cash flow from loaning this money to the federal government. So that's why the treasury bills are seen as assets, and they're the assets that back the dollar because it's representing that cash flow where money was printed out of thin air and then loaned to the government, and the government is going to pay that back plus interest. So I guess if you want to draw out this line of thinking, really what the dollars that we carry in our wallet represent is our future taxes.
Which we all do not like paying.
Yeah, but the IRS was created at the same time that the Federal Reserve was created. There was no need for taxation on the people before you create a central bank. So now our taxes are used to then pay service that debt to the central bank.
Interesting.
Which I guess in some way it might make sense that the central bank was doing something useful and maybe had some real assets backing what they're doing, but they make this money out of thin air, and that's why we're seeing this inflation now, and that's why quantitative easing is a thing, is because there's no effort on the part of the Federal Reserve to print up more money to then buy treasury bills or buy corporate debt or whatever else they're going to buy to inject that money into the system.
Right. Yeah, because you just need a printing press, right? Which the government essentially owns and controls and operates. So
Yeah,
there's nothing too complex
yeah,
about printing money when you have everything
yeah. I mean,
underneath.
yeah. So technically, it's not the government that has the printer because technically it's the Federal Reserve, which is a privately owned bank. But the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department work so close together that it's almost as if the government did have the money printer.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, they're separate entities, but if you really think about it, they are one and the same.
The lines are very blurred.
Exactly. Yeah, very blur. It's more like just in paper. But if the government decides to do something, more likely than not, the Federal Reserve is going to jump on it.
Right, because if Congress or some other branch of governments then goes to the Treasury and says, "Hey, we need money," the Treasury is going to then go to the Fed, say, "Hey, we're going to issue Treasury bills."
Right. And it's interesting because the U.S. government has the power, right? To do essentially whatever they want in theory, uh, almost anything.
Almost
But
anything.
yeah, but but it's like they're forcing us, and they did also when they went off the gold standard, to just believe and take and accept just the paper as currency, as money, right? Now they do have an explanation of how it, like you mentioned, is backed up by all these loans and whatnot. And essentially made it complicated. But back when the first recorded use of actual paper money, uh, you know, uh, once we go back into the very first use and I guess invention, you could say, which was back in the 1300 ADs, uh, it almost sounds very similar to how things operate right now, and it sounds similar in that back in around 1300 AD, an emperor of what was known back then as
Mm.
Mongolia, uh, decided one day to just create his own you know, paper money essentially. And the way that he made everyone accept it and use it and get paid was by enforcing it with his army. He essentially said, if you don't accept
Coercion.
this, if you question it, yeah, I'm gonna kill you. And so you started killing people, and then people were like, well, I kind of want to live, so I'll start accepting this as money, as currency. Um, Now the U.S. government, now if you think about it, I mean, it's not as violent, but in many ways, it's almost being deceptive and trying to make you accept it, even though you may know that it's just paper. They put in place so many rules and laws where everyone has to accept it. And I think this really goes back to why at the start of the episode, I said that money. My definition of money would be whatever you believe, whatever uh, you know, uh, whatever someone makes you believe is money.
Yeah. Whatever people believe naturally or whatever they're forced to believe.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Well, this was fun. I'm glad we got to explore the money side of history, something that uh, we don't learn in school.
I agree. It was fun. It's I find it pretty enjoyable as well to always keep on reading up and discovering things about what was used as money back in the day.
Yeah,
Like the story that you mentioned of cheese and and literally just a huge rock.
yeah.
That was pretty interesting.
Yep. So for me personally, getting into digital assets has sparked this interest in money because I'm trying to understand how digital assets fit into our economy, into the way we do things, and what potential they may have moving forward. So digital assets have sparked this interest in money. And the more that I understand money, the more that I put faith in digital assets because then I start to see that some are clearly used as currency, pretty similar to the U.S. dollar, particularly stable coins, which are pegged to the dollar value-wise. And then some forms of digital assets act more like property, Bitcoin, for example. And other digital assets are more correlated to commodities or stocks in a company.
Definitely. It sounds like the next step in money, right? A lot of this cryptocurrency and crypto assets is like the next step. I mean, if you go back through history, we started with with rocks, and now we're moving to just it being zeros and ones,
Yeah,
being fully decentralized as well, which
yeah.
has a lot of good things behind
Coming
it.
back to the way money was originally, it was decentralized. It wasn't controlled by a central authority or a government.
That's very true. That is a good point. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was not.
Yeah. And now that we know of all these things that have been used as money throughout history, then it's not as weird to think that something that's digital, that's ones and zeros, and that is not tangible could be used as money. Because even 30 years ago, we as a society, we didn't envision what the internet would become and how it would become a third place of sorts where you would hang out, right? Like this is pretty crazy if you took it back 30 years and told somebody that you'd be able to have a live conference like this or a live conversation, it just wasn't it wouldn't click, or like people weren't exposed to this technology. So now that we've created this digital world, then why is it weird to think that money could be digital as well? And why would it be any different to the rhinestones or land
Mhm.
or gold?
Well, well, how would it, if you really think about it, how would it be different than how you bank nowadays? I mean, mostly everyone
That
now
too.
uses banking apps, right? That's not
Yeah.
literally that's almost the same because you're moving money it, essentially through the bank's network and you're just moving zeros and ones as well. You're
Yeah.
just pushing the button and moving money, except that that is very centralized and is within a
Right.
very private network.
So, yeah, uh, in essence, it is a similar experience, but it has an order of magnitude of improvement over the existing system because it's not centralized. You mentioned that right off the bat, right? So you eliminate a lot of manipulation and control and coercion, but it also means that innovation can run as fast as it wants to because anybody can add to the ecosystem. But it's also much more efficient because the credit card system and debit card system, bank deposits, ACH, all the stuff that we know of is running on like 50-year-old technology. And that's why it takes days to move money from one bank account to another bank account.
Mhm,
Whereas blockchain technology is a much newer development, and it takes anywhere from seconds to minutes or maybe an hour to move as much value as you want. So conceptually, it's very similar, but the experience
mhm,
is far superior. And because everything is digital, then you can compose different pieces of the system to create more sophisticated or more flexible financial tools and contracts.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. I guess where I was going with that is more like just, you know, helping visualize just how,
Yeah.
in many ways, right? Uh, Cryptocurrency, crypto assets are like similar to stuff that is being used right now, but like you mentioned, completely agree. Many
Yeah.
more benefits, many
Yes.
more efficient. It really improves society as a whole
Yeah.
uh, by a lot, I think.
Yep. So we'll dive more into tying in this concept of what is money and cryptocurrencies in the next episode. But before we head out, I want to dial it in everybody's uh, psyche. Like, I want to get it into your heads to try stablecoins. I think it is the easiest leap you can make from the current system to the new system. Buy some stablecoins, send them to a wallet that you own that is not an exchange, or pay one of your friends. I did that with one of my friends where Venmo wouldn't let me do a transaction for whatever reason. I bought some stablecoin on Coinbase on my phone, and I sent him the stablecoin from my Coinbase exchange to his Voyager address, and that's how I paid him. So I recommend for everybody listening, if you want to dip your toes in, try stablecoins. They're pegged to the dollar. You can use them to pay people. You can use them to send money across borders. That's the easiest way to dip your toes in because in many ways, it is a similar experience to how you move money around now, either with debit cards, credit cards, or ACH.
Now, for any people that may be watching or listening that are brand new to crypto, how would you explain what you said of being pegged to the dollar? What does that mean?
Yep. So let's take, for example, USD coin, which is my favorite stable coin. If you buy one USD coin, it's worth $1, and it's always worth $1. It is the same value as the US dollar and doesn't change like Bitcoin, which has a fluctuating value against fiat currencies.
Awesome. And that's also a sneak peek to what's to come on the next episode.
Yep, absolutely. So I hope you guys learned a lot from this, and hopefully we piqued your interest to dive into the history of money, understanding what is money, why money is important, and maybe ultimately you might even come to realize that you don't need to ask yourself, uh, does money make you happy?
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, I mean, for me, now that question feels like asking, does ice cream make you happy?
Does it?
Not really, actually. I'm lactose intolerant. It makes me sick.
Uh,
But in the moment, the high does give me the illusion of happiness.
That's true. The thought, right? The thought.
Yeah. Anyway, uh, yeah, thanks everyone for watching. If you got questions or comments, leave them down below. Give us a like if you enjoy this content. It helps us so much more people can discover us. And yeah, with that, stay curious.
All
Later.
right. Until next time, everyone. Bye.